Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Lee. I'm Will Lehman's attorney. Will is a rank and file worker from Mack Truck's plant in Macungie, Pennsylvania. He's just run for president of the UAW. Unfortunately, the election was not a legitimate election. Less than 10% of the UAW's 1.1 million members voted. This was the first direct election that was ever held in the union's history because of the massive corruption scandal that resulted in the majority of the recent leadership of the union being sent to jail for robbing workers and accepting bribes from the corporations. We know that a lot of workers don't have time to read through an 125-page document, which is the length of the protest, which Will's campaign has just submitted to the monitor appointed by the federal court to oversee the election and ensure its fairness. And so hopefully what Will and I can do today is go through some of the material, the most important information that Will's campaign uncovered about the election, and try and make a case for the election to be held again. That's the demand which Will's campaign has made. That's the demand which is supported factually in this protest document, which will be linked in the video. So with that, Will, why don't you begin? Tell us a little bit about what the purpose of this protest is, and we'll get into some of the factual details in a little bit. But who is this protest to? What do you hope comes of it?
Well, this protest is to the federal monitor that our dues, $6 million worth as of August, were used to pay for to oversee the UAW, to enforce that this election is carried out correctly. Well, it wasn't carried out correctly. And that 9% turnout is the result of that. This was not a matter of worker apathy. This was a matter of both retirees, over 600,000 of them, and active workers either not being able to get a ballot or not knowing the election was even going on. So they did not get a democratic say in this election.
So we know that 104,000 ballots were actually counted out of a membership of over 1 million people. How many ballots actually did workers receive? Do we know that?
No, we don't. We know that those 104,000 ballots that came back were cast. We also know that over 100,000 ballots were returned because they could not be delivered because of the lack of updating of the Lewis system.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Local union information system. A lot of workers haven't heard of it. I don't think you heard of it before this election. The Lewis system is the system which the union says and the monitor says it used to provide notice to the membership that an election was taking place. Can you talk a little bit about what we learned, especially in the course of the lawsuit, about what the Lewis system actually is and why it's a problem that was used to give notice about the election?
Well, the Lewis system stands for Local Union Information System. And essentially, it has only been used up to this point for the international to communicate with locals and vice versa, and the locals to communicate, with themselves. So it wasn't really a system that was designed for the workers. It actively cut out the membership, and that was a point the judge made during our lawsuit, was that it seemed to neglect active worker participation in the system. And that's been brought to bear now in this election that only had 9% turnout. That's the result of that. As far as the mailing list goes, we were able to email members. We were told we would have essentially more communication ability than we actually received, such as robo-texting, robo-calling, these mass lists to communicate with workers. But effectively, we were cut off from the membership because the locals did not update this Lewis system to include all the members. We appealed to the monitor to enforce this, to actually make the local unions gather the information we needed so that we could communicate with these workers. But the monitor failed to do that. And that resulted in a 9% turnout in the election.
Okay, so we know that 104,000 ballots were actually counted. We know that 110,000 ballots were marked as undeliverable and returned to sender. So you're talking about a chunk of basically 900,000 ballots. The monitor says those ballots were sent, but we don't actually know if workers ever received them. And now when you mentioned this Lewis system 1.2 is, it wasn't, just to clarify, a system that was used to communicate with the members of the local unions. It was a system that was used within the UAW bureaucracy to communicate between international officials and officials in the locals, like the union presidents and the secretary treasurers and that type of thing. So if your name, and one thing that this report has done is it shows that in the vast majority of cases, the union didn't ask any of its members to update their information. Can you talk a little bit about that? Either, at your plant, what was your experience, or what did workers tell you? What did you find out in the course of writing this protest about what actions the locals actually took to try to update that LUIS list so that workers actually would get notice?
Well, as far as my plant's participation, it was around 38%. We were able, as in my campaign, naturally was able to do 2 distributions of information about the election. And I was not allowed to speak to workers while they were on company time, and I was not allowed to speak while I was on company time. So just those 2 distributions by our team seemed to have an impact because our turnout was 38%. Now,
way higher. You're talking about 4 times higher than the average in this election.
Correct. And as far as my local, the only thing I saw were 2 posters with a sample ballot on them. Now, if you aren't already in the know as to what this election taking place was, you would have no idea what that ballot was. You could confuse it with something of a Democratic midterm mailer, which I received 6 of, but no correspondence about the national election going on for this international UAW.
So in your report, you did a survey of over 100 UAW members, active and retired, from over 10% of all the locals. And you said that in your local, there were posters put up, but 75% of the workers who filled out this survey said that no posters were put up at their workplace. I think something like 80% of the people who responded said that they never received any email from their local about the election. 95% said they never got a text message. So there were basic, very obvious, very cheap methods that the locals could have taken to inform people that an election was taking place. And it seems like very few of those locals actually did that. Now, and that would mean that the Lewis system, and by the way, when the campaign started, there were only 40,000 names on that list. That came out in one of the referendum reports. At the end of the campaign, there were not all that many. There was slightly over 100,000. So about 10%, which is about the number of people that voted. And a substantial portion of those people were bureaucrats and those would have been votes for Curry and for Sean Fain. But I do want to ask you about this because you mentioned that the UAW was able to take pretty active, pretty sophisticated, pretty professional steps when telling you about the midterm elections, which took place basically at the exact same time, right? Can you talk a little bit more about that element of your report, of your protest?
Right. Well, as I said, I received over 6 pieces of mail from them, telling me who the UAW's pick is for a candidate in the election in Pennsylvania, in the midterms, more specifically. And I had other workers actually message me as well that they received a ton of mail supporting Democrats in the local elections and these midterms. But I received nothing, as well as any other member I've spoken with, about through the mail anyway, that there was an international executive board election taking place.
Basically, what you're saying is the UAW employs hundreds and hundreds of people. They're very capable of telling people about the election. I saw some of the mailers that you said they were saying, don't forget to vote. Don't forget about the deadline to register. Don't forget The election is on November 8th. Make sure to value your right to vote. They didn't say anything like that with the UAW election. Why do you think that is?
Well, it doesn't serve their interest. The UAW, the entrenched UAW bureaucracy, is only interested in taking actions to ensure that it stays in power. And whether that's through supporting Democrats in these midterms or suppressing the vote in our own election, the UAW seeks to protect the bureaucratic apparatus of it, seeks to protect its own interests. It's not operating in the interests of the workers. Now, the federal monitor was put in place with the stated intention of enforcing the UAW to carry out this election and to force it to have workers having a democratic say in this election, but it failed to do so, as evidenced by the turnout. And like you stated, with the 100,000 members receiving an email, and there's just so happens to be 100,000 members that voted, that connection can't really be ignored. When workers are communicated with, when members are communicated with, there's action. But there was an active suppression of that communication by the UAW. Even, when my campaign went to Flint, Michigan to try to campaign there was a UAW bureaucrat trying to kick us out, which we reported to the monitor. And it's just another example of the UAW trying to suppress any and all information to the workers that could benefit the working class.
By the way, in your report, you also note that the president of UAW Region 4 threatened volunteers from your campaign with physical violence when they heard that they were there to campaign on your behalf. So that's a president of Region 4. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it goes to what you're saying. You also raise in your protest the question of what took place in California and Washington State with the academic workers.
There were about 48,000 UC workers in California that went on strike, and it was a courageous strike over cost of living and over what their pay is. Now, where they're living at in California is one of the most expensive places to live in the country, as well as the workers at the New School in New York, workers at HarperCollins in New York, who make poverty wages, especially when you take into consideration the expense of where they're living. And they went and tried to mount a struggle to better their working conditions. The UAW gave up COLA very quickly, and the UC workers had really no recourse there, which leads me to why I talk about the building of rank and file committees to take the struggle into their own hands. And that's what I'm trying to spread this whole campaign, has been that message.
Right. So these academic workers, as you say, they're underpaid, they are overworked, but they're not apathetic because they're on strike, or they recently were. But if you look at these figures, it's very clear that the union leadership in Detroit decided that they didn't want any of these younger members of the union to vote. Now, the union, by the way, they take automatic dues out every month. They managed to do that for everybody. But at the California State University system, this is in your protest, there are over 11,000 members of the union, Local 4123, and 29 votes were cast in the UAW national election. 29 out of 11,000. Okay. Then at the University of California system, there were about 1,200 votes cast out of 48,000. That's for locals 2865 and local 5810. Those are the two UC locals that were on strike. And that's about 3%, 2.5% turnout. And then at the University of Washington, at local 4121, there were 9,000 ballots, which the monitor sent to the members of that union, 72 votes cast, 72 votes out of 9,000. That is a turnout of 0.78%. 0.78%. So can you tell me, I mean, why did the UAW not want any of these younger workers to vote? And how did you do among those workers who did vote, by the way? How did you do in those locals?
I got around 15 to 25% of the vote at some of these locals, even beating Ray Curry at some. This is, at the same time, though, this low turnout is deemed perfectly acceptable by both the Federal Monitor and the UAW bureaucrats that are holding this election. This is not something they're fighting. This is not something they're concerned about the workers not having a voice in, and they're not questioning why. They're just blaming the workers for being apathetic. These workers were willing to launch this huge strike, one of the largest of educators in this country ever, and they're saying that these workers are apathetic. They're absolutely not. They would absolutely love the opportunity, but they were not presented with it. And if the Federal Monitor were doing its job correctly, it would have conducted this investigation and found that the workers aren't apathetic and uncovered what we're trying to put out there. What we've uncovered in this protest is exactly the point, that workers are not apathetic in this. They've been launching into strike after strike in the UAW since 2019, and they absolutely want to fight, but they're being sold out at every opportunity from doing so.
Well, you also raised in your protest, your campaign conducted an audit of, I think, every single local's website and Facebook page to determine whether the locals actually did do anything there to inform the membership. What did you learn there?
They didn't, but in large part, there was no alerting the membership on Facebook. I don't have the exact figures on me, but they didn't do it on Facebook. If they don't have their email in the Lewis system, they're not going to inform them that way. And if they don't have their contact information, how are they ever supposed to inform the workers that there is this going on?
So there are a couple other things in your protest which are very important, which everybody who's watching this should read. Really want to encourage everybody to read this report. It's got a lot of factual information out there. There's a link to the report, which is provided here. You can also go to willforuawpresident.org and download the report in full there. A lot of workers who did get to vote, though, Will, how do they know that their vote was actually counted? And was your vote counted?
Well, that's another aspect of this election that wasn't communicated to all the workers. There was a number on everyone's outer sleeve of the envelope that they received their ballot in, if they did receive a ballot. And there was a tracking number on it that you could use to track your ballot. Many workers didn't know this was available for them because, again, this wasn't communicated either. I tracked my ballot, and my ballot was never scanned. So I was not even myself able to participate in this election other than to campaign.
So if a candidate's vote doesn't even count, then I imagine that a lot of workers who did get to vote, if they didn't check to make sure that their vote was scanned and counted, can they be sure that their vote was even counted in the tally?
Well, no, realistically, no. I had assumed mine was counted until I used that tracking number to track it. But there is no definite way to ensure that your ballot was counted. The UAW vote page that had the tracking available since shut it down about a week after the count. So there's no way to even track it now if you did receive a ballot.
Okay. So, Will, just a couple of concluding questions. What's going to happen now? What do you think the monitor is going to do? What do you want workers to do? And what is your demand? What are you asking for right now?
My campaign is trying to exhaust every possible recourse we have in this election because it wasn't carried out democratically. We're doing everything we can, but ultimately, as was stated in the very beginning of this election, is any changes that come about are going to be workers organizing on their own floors, communicating with each other, and establishing rank and file committees so they can have democratic decision making on every shop floor. We need to start recognizing every way we're being sold out, and we need to do something. This shows that the UAW is not interested in being a workers' organization. It's interested in maintaining control and selling workers out to these corporations that keep driving down our wages and working conditions. So we need to do something to fight back. This is one aspect of that fight, but we're calling on workers to form rank and file committees at every local to take the fight into our own hands.
They say now there will be a runoff between Curry and Fain. Presumably, if your protest is accepted by the monitor, that means that a runoff won't happen. If there is a runoff, will you be endorsing either Ray Curry or Sean Fain?
No, I won't. While Sean Fain postures as a reform candidate, there is no reforming the UAW bureaucracy. All right, it's entrenched. It's only interested in protecting its own interests, and it's going to continue to operate in a way that sells the workers out. It's Sean Fain's campaign puts on the mask of reforming the UAW, but it will not change the nature of the UAW. Ray Curry is the open face of the way the UAW operates. All right, he's not mincing words with talk about reform. He says the reforms have already been completed. Well, this is the result of those completed reforms, a 9% turnout in the election.
All right, thank you. I just also want to add, Will, that this, and I think your protest makes this very clear. You're filing this protest not just on your own behalf as a candidate, but on behalf of every single member of the UAW, active and retired, regardless of who they voted for. There are a lot of other candidates for president who won't make a runoff as a result of this fraudulent election in the first round. But what your protest is fighting for is the right to vote in an election that actually reflects the democratic will of the membership as a whole. That clearly, even by their own rules, that clearly has not happened here. And also, just I would add, in the putting together of this report and in the filing of the lawsuit that we took in November, I just want to say that none of this could have happened without the support from the rank and file, that every single worker who submitted a report, that every single worker who answered the survey, every single worker who submitted a complaint with the monitor and forwarded those complaints to Will's campaign. Thank you. This information is being made available because of you, because you stepped forward. That's the way that this campaign is going to continue to gain momentum. Will, just as a final question, is this, if your protest is denied, is this the end of your campaign? How do you see this going forward?
Well, naturally, no. We're going to be facing a number of challenges coming up in the future. A number of contracts are expiring, and it can't be left. The fights ahead can't be left in the hands of these bureaucrats to lead. The workers need a democratically run organization where we can state our demands and carry out the kinds of fights that we're prepared to carry out, in addition to calling on each other for support. That's going to be only accomplished through establishing those rank and file committees. That's what the point of the whole campaign was for workers to take power into our own hands. We already have the power to make the changes we want to see in the future. We just need to have the organization. And an organization run by bureaucrats determined to appease companies is ultimately not going to produce the changes we want to see.
Okay, thank you, Will, and thank you to everybody for watching this. If you're watching, read the report, download the report. Yes, it takes a bit of time to read, but it's got information that you need to know. It's got information that you have a right to know, information that the UAW is withholding from you. Send it to your coworkers, talk about it, get the word out there. That's not going to happen through any other means other than by the rank and file taking action themselves to share this information and make everybody aware of the truth. So thank you very much. And thank you, Will, for talking to me. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Eric. And yes, thank you, everybody that made this possible.